Well, I want to start off, I want you all to imagine that you are in the middle of a 3rd grade classroom. All around you are little hands covered in Play-Doh, and well, everything is covered in Play-Doh. You hear little voices talking and screaming and roaring and yelling, and the jaws of feline skulls are being opened and shut, and tape measures are being taken out, and puma pelts are being measured, and crowns are flying. It is complete chaos. And as you stand in the middle of it, you do your best to control it. Well, this was me 3 weeks ago in my action project. And as I had stood there, I had heard a quiet, "Miss Alaina?" And I looked down to see a little boy in a blue jacket with golden blonde hair and a bit of whatever he ate for lunch on the side of his face. I knelt down to him and said, "Yes?" He said, "Miss Alaina." And he held this skull out to me. And he said, "Miss Alaina, what does a lynx look like?" My name is Alaina Wray, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Today I'm going to be discussing with you what makes effective and engaging environmental education. Now again, the story I just told you was from my action project, and I'm going to come back to that later. But first, I want to talk to you about my thesis paper. So for my thesis paper, I studied what are the most effective ways to educate and engage youth in environmental education, conservation, and sustainable action. And to answer this, I studied the history of environmental education, the history of our relationship with our land and animals, as well as what makes effective education and how education can better our world. But you might be wondering, okay, so why does that matter? Well, this is where we live. And if this beautiful and dynamic mountainous landscape doesn't convince you, well, I'm going to tell you this. Our world is being harmed by our growing need for its resources, our continual treatment of it as a commodity, our harmful development, and us not recreating responsibly in protected areas. And it's essential that we work to change our behaviors towards the earth and protect and save it. There's a popular saying in conservation that says we will only save what we love and love what we care about. And my hero, Steve Irwin, says, in agreement with that, if we can get people excited about animals, then by crikey, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to save them. So what this means is if we want people to change their behaviors and better our world, we need to get them to love animals. There was a study done in Mexico that says that when appropriate or good environmental education is integrated, it changes for more, gets students to engage in sustainable behavior, it improves support for conservation, it reduces poaching, and it influences policy around the environment. That same study says that when we include, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say there. Anyway, it's important. Having good environmental education is important and that we need to integrate it. Now you're probably wondering, okay, so what makes effective and engaging environmental education? Well, I found that in my research that education that uses holistic and innovative pedagogy is the most effective way to engage and inspire youth in environmental education, conservation, and sustainable action. That was a mouthful, and you're probably now like, okay, so what is holistic and innovative pedagogy? Well, so basically pedagogy means teaching methods, and I'm going to stick with teaching methods for the rest of this talk. So there's quite a few different teaching methods that makes this education effective, but today I'm going to talk to you about 3 of them. The first one is empathy. Now, for the purpose of this talk, empathy is defined as a stimulated emotional state that relies on the ability to perceive, understand, and care about the experiences of or perspectives of another person or animal. And to really understand why empathy is important and how it can play a role in this education, I want to talk to you about a project that was done at the Smithsonian. So at the Smithsonian, they wanted these students to start engaging with engineering topics that were thought to be above them. And so what they did is they wanted to use empathy. So they started doing empathy growing activities about this sea lion. First, they had the students, they were like, hey, this is what a sea lion looks like, and this is where it lives. And then they had the kids write down on a plastic plate, like, hey, what's on your plate? What do you eat? And they were like, now this is what a sea lion eats. And then they had the kids put on flippers and big rain jackets and goggles, and they're like, this is what it feels like to be the sea lion. And then they took the kids to the zoo and they got to meet the sea lion and really, truly experience it. And these kids who had grown up this great empathy for the sea lion now cared deeply. And so the educators then said, okay, we have a problem. This sea lion is getting hurt in its enclosure because of the sun. The sun warms up the concrete and it burns the sea lion's skin, and the sunlight is bouncing off the water and hurting the sea lion's eyes. How are we going to fix this? And so the students who had great empathy again for the sea lion said, okay, we need to create shade to protect the sea lion. And they started making models of shade structures and engaging with these deep engineering topics. The people in this article also says that when empathy is in environmental education, it allows students to start asking questions like, how can we help sea lions? Or what does a bobcat need to feel safe? Or why do baby turtles follow the moon? The Woodland Park Zoo agrees by saying that when empathy is in environmental education, it causes students to start asking questions like, what can I do to help? Oh, the Woodland Park Zoo also says in a study they did that conservation psychology says that people need to know more than what to do and why to do it. They need a personal connection to it, and that's where empathy comes in. For example, people need to know more than what light pollution is. They need to connect to the baby sea turtles who are affected by it. They need to connect to the turtles who follow the city lights instead of following the moon to the ocean. The next thing I want to talk to you about is integrating real-world topics. A study done in China on energy education says that we need to move away from passive textbook learning and start talking about real-world problems, to have in-depth discussions, understanding, and to start problem-solving the things that are happening in our world. Because traditional passive learning from textbooks doesn't allow us to look at these issues from all sides. Now, that might have been confusing, so to really understand what I mean, I want to talk about the recent rise in turtle poaching in Costa Rica and Panama. So in Costa Rica and Panama, due to COVID, the tourism industry shut down, and both of these countries relied so heavily on that the people, in order to survive for both food and income, started resorting to poaching turtles. One local Panamanian fisherman and turtle hunter says, quote, "All my friends who worked in tourism, everyone I knew went out to sea to go fish." Even with the down in COVID and tourism starting to return to these countries, these people are still hunting and poaching turtles because, like hunting to many people in the US, it's a deeply rooted part of their culture. That same Panamanian fisherman says, "Why do you think God put all these turtles out in the ocean? They said that the turtles would go extinct, but we ate way more back then. There's still plenty of turtles in the sea, but it's all the great turtle hunters who disappeared." These local people want to know why hunting turtle is bad when they don't see a consequence. They also want to know where their local tradition is gone. With COVID, they had no choice, but without COVID, should they have a choice? How do we balance the cultural and economic needs of these people with the health of our turtle population and ocean ecosystem? This topic is complex, right? There's not one right answer, and only looking at it from one side, one might say, okay, so poaching is bad, so those who hunt turtles are also bad. But this issue is too complex for that, and every environmental issue is too complex to look at from one side, which is why it is essential that we start letting youth grappling with the problems of our world and start trying to problem solve them. The last method I want to talk to you about today is incorporating sense of place. Now, sense of place is the attachment that an individual has to a particular space. And to really help you guys understand this, I'm going to do a little activity, and all you have to do is be honest and raise your hand if it applies to you. Now, take a look at this picture. This is the Amazon rainforest 22 years ago. So in this picture, I want you to pay attention to the green, and in this picture, I want you to pay attention to where the forest is clearly missing. This is the Amazon rainforest 2 years ago. I'll kind of flip back and forth so you can see the difference. Now, raise your hand if you have done something about this. Have you signed a petition, cut palm oil out of your diet, emailed the government? Nobody? Okay, moving on. This is Wolf Creek now. This is Wolf Creek 10 years from now. Raise your hand if you've done something about this. Right? More people. Have you gotten a sticker, a t-shirt, signed a petition, gone to a protest? I know you guys did that, that's cool. The reason that we have done something about this in Wolf Creek instead of in the Amazon forest is because of sense of place. We are attached to the land that we live in, that we work in, that we play in, that we recreate in, that we live in, we laugh and we love, and all those corny things. And that is why sense of place is so important, because it incites more action towards the places that we live in. A study done in Colombia about how sense of place affects youth and sustainability and well-being says that when sense of place is incorporated in environmental education, it empowers and engages youth in both their education and action towards the environment, as well as allows them to look at their relationship with their world and how they can better their behaviors to make it better. Now, I know I just said a lot, so let me recap what I learned in my research, and I hope that you learned too. 1, Earth is beautiful and we are destroying it. We need to change our relationship, and the best way to do this is to have effective and engaging education that uses holistic and innovative pedagogy that includes discussion of real-world topics and inspiring and growing sense of place and empathy, and that these need to be implemented into our school system and environmental outreach programs. If you can't tell already, I am very, very passionate about this topic, which is why it was very easy for me in my action project to want to start to apply what I was learning. And so I got to actually go to Juniper Elementary School and teach a lesson about mountain lions to both the 2nd and the 3rd graders. And over the next couple minutes, I'm going to kind of explain what that looked like. So I got to teach 2 lessons, hour-long lessons, Thursday and Fridays. And on day 1, I had 5 different stations about mountain lions. And so station 1, they got to actually interact with this real puma pelt that I got from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And this was to grow their empathy and just get them to be able to experience the mountain lion. And it was really cool because they were so inquisitive and so curious that themselves went and found tape measures in their classroom and started measuring the mountain lion. They were also so curious that they just started looking for all the claws in the puma pelt, and they were so fascinated by finding every single one of them. Station 2 was similar in exploration because they got to interact with different skulls. The mountain lion skull, domestic cat, lynx, and bobcat. This is the lynx one, by the way, if you didn't catch that earlier. The next station is they got to watch this video of a puma hunting, and they watched it over and over and over again because they just found it so fascinating to see a real puma in action. Also, there was a baby puma in that video, so. At station 4, they got to create cars that had puma paw prints on them, and they loved it when I said, yes, you can take this home. They also got to read an article about a local puma, which I was like, yes, it's gonna grow their sense of place. Turns out that 2nd and 3rd graders don't care about reading articles, funny enough. But what really actually grew their sense of place is the fact that pumas live in their area, and they were very interested in that fact and loved it. Station 5, which was my favorite and the hardest to create and figure out, was where they got to learn about what makes a good puma den and habitat and build it using Play-Doh and rocks and little animal figurines and sticks and pine needles. One student had called me over and he had placed this flat rock outside of the puma den that he built, and they built and put the little elk on top of it because, you know, we eat at a table, so clearly the puma needs to eat at a table too. Day 2, the first thing I had them do was practice what to do in a puma encounter, because I see that as really important that we know how to coexist and be safe around these animals. And so they came up and practiced what Colorado Parks and Wildlife says to do. And this activity brought on the most interesting questions. For example, one kid asked me if he very carefully, without bending down, could take his shoe off and take his smelly sock off and throw it at the puma if that would scare it away. I said, how about we just keep our shoes on? One of the other questions I got is this little boy raised his hand, and when I called him, he goes, Miss Alaina, my friend Arrow over there, he's like the fastest. He's like the fastest ever. He's faster than all of us. And I'm pretty sure if he like encountered a puma, he could like definitely outrun it. And I was like, okay, Arrow, how fast do you think you are? And he's like, I don't know, just like the fastest. And I said, well, okay, so the fastest human can run like, or the average human can run like 7-10 miles an hour. Average puma can run like 45 to 55 miles an hour. And they were like, what? Arrow, you could not outrun a puma. It was adorable. The next thing I had them do was a relay race. where they got to, in their different teams, get through all the steps that a puma takes to hunt. So they had to stalk and run and leap and drag and cache. And real quick, caching is when a puma will hide its kill so other scavengers and animals don't want to meet it. And my original goal with this had been to get them outside, because my research had also shown that environmental education needs to be outside in the environment, go figure. However, Juniper Elementary School, it's outside, includes concrete, dust, and wood chips, so I didn't really achieve this goal as much as I'd like to. But getting second and third graders to run around for 30 minutes is very effective at calming them down. And that kind of brings me to my reflection. When I originally did this research, I didn't think there was really any problems with it. I was like, this is great, we need to have this type of education in our education system. It's super important, right? But as I actually had to implement and do it, I found that there are lots of barriers. For instance, Juniper Elementary didn't have a good outdoor space. They didn't have green grass or trees or flowers. And a lot of, especially schools like in cities and stuff, don't have good outdoor spaces. As well as, I'm no seasoned teacher, but it did take me 5 weeks to come up with 2 2-hour lessons. And having to put that type of effort is just not always plausible with all that teachers already have to do. The other thing is, there was only one of me, and if there's 24 second graders in the room, there needed to be 3 of me. And so there's only one teacher to a classroom usually, and we don't have enough teachers to always make this happen, especially for field trips and stuff. So I found that if we really want to start changing our world and having this education, we actually need to look at how our education system is being funded and the resource being given to it and change it. Now, I know this whole time what you guys really have been curious about, just like the little boy in the blue hoodie with the golden hair and a little bit of whatever he ate for lunch on the side of his face. This is what a lynx looks like. Thank you all for coming to my TED Talk, and I hope you learned something.